Hello there, my lovelies. How's it going? My name's Beamy and you're watching my channel, Beamy Reactions. Now, today, guys, the video that I would like to watch along with you guys is a little bit more serious. So, you know, the tone is going to be a little bit different for this video. This is one of those like catastrophes that have obviously happened in recent memory that I have not actually heard of this. So I have no idea how this unfolds or what happens. The title of the video is How Shopping at This Mall Killed 502 People. Oh my, it sounds like an absolute disaster. Unsurprisingly, I've not heard of this, so I don't know whether it's I don't know, like, has it been underreported, or I mean, we've established I live under a rock, so not too surprising that I haven't heard of this event, but it sounds like an absolute disaster. So this video has been requested by one of my lovely patrons. This has been requested from Soy. Thank you, my lovely. And Soy says, I wish I was surprised by any of the horrible choices made within this video. Okay, I'm going in prepared that it's probably a soul-destroying, crushing story. Okay, guys, that's our warning. So let's crack on with the video, and I'm sure we'll find out where this has actually happened. So a shopping mall that ended up with 502 people dying. Oh my gosh. So let's crack on with the video. And guys, if you're enjoying these reactions, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thank you so much. And if you're interested, guys, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, and that link is over here.
June 29th, 1995.
Oh, that's loud.
2 p.m. Socho District, Seoul, South Korea. The Sampoong department store was, by any measure, having a good day. 40,000 shoppers moved through its 5 floors. Families drifted between clothing racks. Teenagers crowded the food court. Children pressed their hands against the glass display cases near the entrance. Unbeknownst to them, up above, on the 5th floor, the mall's top executives were having a meeting to decide their fate. The suits sat around a table in one of the management offices. Chairman Lee Jun and his son, the store's president, were presiding over the meeting. The building's cooling systems had been switched off roughly an hour earlier, and the hot air in the room had gone completely still.
Why? Why was the aircon turned off? Okay, so this was in South Korea. Again, I have no idea why I have not heard of this. Well, it sounds like an absolute disaster, so I'm just going to refer to it as an absolute disaster, catastrophe. How have I not heard of this happening? It seems, you know, ginormous. This is like a historical event. That's so many deaths.
Spread across the table in front of them were maintenance logs, photographs, and handwritten warnings. Everyone presented their conflicting ideas of what to do with the situation at hand, but Chairman Lee Jun shut the conversation down, rose from the table, and delivered his instruction. The mall would stay open. The escalators would keep running, the employees would keep working, and most importantly, the happy shoppers would keep spending their money.
Well, that's the most important thing for these guys, isn't it? Okay, so they have personalized, handwritten warnings, advising them on what? So what is it that the advice is? That the mall isn't fit to be up and running, operational? For what reason? Is it structural, or is it something to do with the aircon? Is it expenses? I hope they didn't mention it and I've just missed it, but I don't think they've mentioned it yet.
Then, at 5:40 p.m., without a word to anyone, the executives walked out of the building to safety and left thousands of customers and employees to die. But the story does not begin with that meeting. It had been building since early that morning. Let's get into it.
Absolute pigs, bureaucratic pigs. The blood is on their hands. I'm not too sure what it is that's making this mall unsafe, but how could you walk away from knowing? I think this video might make me angry.
At 8:05 a.m., the facility manager at Sampoong department store unfolded a handwritten note from the night shift security guard. It said there was a loud cracking noise coming from the roof. The manager read it twice, then he folded the note, put it in his pocket, and went upstairs. At 10:02 a.m., he arrived at the food court, which spanned the entirety of the 5th floor, the top floor of the building. By the time he got there, part of the restaurant area had already been closed to the public after staff noticed large cracks running around one of the main concrete columns that supported that floor. But the
Oh my holy ghost. Oh, this is, yeah, okay. This is a severe structural problem, to say the least. Obviously, Boomy. Yes, yes, it is obvious at this point. How on earth can you have these warnings about the structure of a huge building, a huge shopping complex, and ignore them?
The rest of the department store stayed open. The manager crouched down to get a closer look at the damage. Some of the cracks were wide enough to slide a finger into. He knew the building well enough to understand what he was looking at. The upper floors depended heavily on columns like this one to carry the load. If one of them started to fall, there was no telling what could happen. He then moved up to the roof and saw that the concrete there had split in several places with long fractures cutting across the surface. Some areas had sunk lower than others.
Right, like at this point, it's surely it's policy, surely it's law that this entire building has to be, taped off, never to be accessed unless you are a structural engineer or professionals. The public should not be anywhere near this building at this point. Something tells me it's going to get worse and there's going to be more problems. But even at this point, were there no members of the public that spotted these cracks and questioned it? And wow, you'd rely on the higher ups taking responsibility for the maintenance and following the right procedures. And oh, this is going to make my blood boil.
Worked his way back through the upper levels, speaking to maintenance staff and checking every area that had been flagged. The crew had already moved heavy furniture away from the worst cracks, filed their reports, and put up caution tape to keep the damage out of view from customers.
Oh yeah, that'll be enough.
They wouldn't want to alarm them.
No.
This would be the first of many unfortunate choices made that day that would eventually result in a horrific tragedy.
The choices. Okay.
The likes of which the country had never seen. At 10:03 a.m., with the restaurant section still cordoned off, the rest of Sampung opened as usual. But by midday, the problem was no longer confined to the upper floors. A deep bang echoed through the building, loud enough that shoppers on the lower levels paused and looked around. Most assumed it was something being dropped and kept moving. Meanwhile, staff on the upper floors could feel a faint vibration underfoot, and looking up, they could see fine dust shaking loose from the ceilings above them.
No, I could actually feel my anxiety levels creeping up. Good storytelling. It's making me feel like I'm there watching this entire disaster unfold. And
management closed off additional sections above, but the sales floor below still looked entirely normal. Customers kept moving through cosmetic counters and clothing racks. Most had no idea that the 5th floor was partially closed. The escalators were still running. The registers were still opening and shutting. Nothing raised any red flags. Even for the workers, like 18-year-old store employee Lee Soon-min, working what she planned to be her final shift before starting college later that summer. Or like 19-year-old Yu Ji-hwan. For her, it was a normal day. She put on her nice shirt and went down to the basement level to start her shift in the home goods section, selling crystals. She had been working at this job for around 6 months, except she heard a rumor that the 5th floor had sunken a bit. But since no one was being evacuated, she figured there was nothing to worry about, and instead just focused on getting through the day.
This isn't just something that happened even over the space of a week. This sounds like this is something that, when rumors are starting to circulate about an entire floor sinking, this isn't something that happens over the space of like a few days or a week. This has been something that's been recognized, it's acknowledged, well, not by the higher ups by the sound of it, not officially. This is something that's been going on for months at least. And it is unbelievably negligent to not address the structural problems. Or, did they make any any attempt to try and solve the, I mean, if it's a structural problem, I don't know what you can do, but at the absolute bare minimum, keep people safe. Don't allow the public into this building. It's making me so cross. Oh, I don't like the fact that the narrator said that about these two young women and said it was their last shift. Oh.
At 12:30 p.m., the manager turned his attention to the roof equipment. He saw that the cracks had worsened since morning. The air conditioning units on the roof had been running all day. He ordered to shut them down. The hum that had run through the upper floors all morning went quiet, but it was...
Hang on. Even if they shut those air conditioning units off, is it not the weight of these units that's causing the structural problems here, or at least the cracking concrete? So turning them off surely isn't going to remedy much. It's not going to have that much of an impact. You're just going to have a really big building full of people sweating.
Far too late. The dust along the crack lines continued to fall. There was nothing anyone could do now to stop what was about to happen.
Get everyone
on the fifth
out,
floor,
quick.
Heavy kitchen equipment like industrial ovens, massive room-sized refrigerators, and long cooking stations lined the restaurant. All of this was pressing down on a structure already strained by the weight on the rooftop. At 1:30 p.m., the manager went back up to the roof. The fractures had spread since his last visit. Several had widened. Fine concrete powder gathered along the edges of the splits where pieces of the roof were grinding against each other. This was the last warning sign for him. He picked up the phone and called his superiors directly, warning them that the building might be at risk. But the decision of what to do next was unfortunately not his to make.
It's going to get worse and worse. It's like every decision. The most... I know I'm not at the end of the story, but already, and we're still fairly early on, I'm sensing that, you know, there's already far too many things that have been recognized and not actioned appropriately anyway. Even at this point, what was it? Was it like a 10 o'clock visit, this chap here, and then at 1:30? So are we talking about like a space of what, like 3 to 4 hours maybe? That's enough. That's enough time to evacuate the building. You don't need to wait any longer.
Perhaps if it had been, hundreds of lives could have been spared. At 2:00 p.m., the senior executives of Sampung Department Store gathered in a management office on the 5th floor for an emergency meeting. Reports were set across the table, maintenance logs, photos of the cracks, and notes from the facility manager. The air inside the room had gone still since the cooling units had been shut down, making them sweat. As they talked, they wondered why this could be happening. Back in 1987, when Lee Jun's company was constructing the structure that would later become this mall, the project had originally been approved as only a 4-story building for a different use. They decided to use the flat slab method to save money. It meant that the floors sat directly on columns without thick crossbeams or a strong steel frame to spread the weight.
I don't pretend to, have any knowledge on, the structure of buildings or archaeology, or I have no knowledge of what structural engineers do, what they know, what they specialize in. However, even a dummy like me can watch this and just immediately see, why on earth would you do that?
Kind of design, there is no backup support, and every column has to be perfect. If one fails, the load has nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
But halfway through construction, the owners made a major decision to convert it into a department store instead. That decision forced engineers to modify the design. An additional floor was added, and extensive modifications were made to the gray structure. The redesign pushed the total floor area from the originally intended 720,000 square feet to nearly 800,000. The building now had to support thousands of shoppers, restaurants, and heavy retail equipment, far beyond what the original structure had been designed for.
Right, so the decision to change the plan and make this into a department store, and as a consequence, they added the extra floor on top. That's it. That's greed. It's wanting more profit. It's wanting more money. If it's not possible, if it's not advised, and it absolutely shouldn't be bearing any more weight, do not allow anyone to plan for that, to try and push that through. guidelines are there for a reason. Why is no one enforcing them?
To make matters worse, these particular columns had been built smaller than the design required. The original blueprint specified columns 79 centimeters thick. However, during construction in 1988, that number was reduced by a quarter, down to 58 centimeters.
So you're increasing the weight by... I can't do the math that quickly. You're increasing the weight on these columns by adding that 5th floor. And whose bright spark of an idea was it to then, obviously it's going to be to save money, isn't it? It's always to save money in situations like this. Terrible. Now they've also decided they're going to cut corners and they're going to reduce the thickness of these columns by 25%. Like, at least if you're going to make stupid decisions and for some reason you've been allowed to do it, don't carry on cutting corners. Like, you know, overcompensate for it. Make the columns thicker, at least. You know, it would have been something.
At construction costs.
You can tell I'm getting cross.
On top of that, the columns were spread out further than intended, nearly 11 meters apart from each other. With
no structure in the floor. I know what I mean. I'm not articulating that very well. So they're just flat kind of concrete panels, aren't they, on the roof? There's no interlocking structure. Oh, it just gets worse and worse.
As per Chairman Lee Jun's orders, more space between columns meant more room for shops, which meant more rental income. It also meant that each column was being asked to carry an enormous share of the building's total load, with no margin for error.
And if one
Even though
fails,
the changes pushed the building beyond its original load limits, the plan still received approval from the local government office in Seocho District.
And this is what I was getting at, guys. I know I have to keep stopping this. You can all tell by now this is slowly boiling my blood. I'm getting cross. Not only are these stupid additions to the plans, these changes, these alterations, not only are these stupid alterations being permitted or even thought up in the first place, they are being given the go-ahead, the green light, by law enforcement, like by the government, did they say? So it's like stupid on all levels. You'd like to think that, you know, regulations, building regs and whatever, they're in place for good reason. Sometimes they can be a little bit annoying when you're doing DIY and stuff around the house. Yes. But they're there for a reason. And you'd like to think, even if the plans were come up with by dummies and things have been overlooked, that the people that enforce the safety aspect of it are going to detect it and ultimately just refuse it and be like, no, you haven't done this, you haven't done X, Y, Z, and so you're absolutely not allowed to go ahead, come back with better plans. So it's just like multiple failures on all levels here.
Somehow. But there was resistance from the engineers themselves.
Okay,
Woosun Construction, the firm that was hired to construct the original design, refused to carry out the changes. Their engineers reviewed the new plans and told Lee Jun that the redesign posed serious structural risks. The modified building would not hold, they said. Lee dismissed them and brought in his own company to carry out the changes, including the addition of the 5th floor. The problems stacked up from there. Turning the building into a department store meant installing escalators on every floor. To do that, workers cut huge holes through each concrete slab. Every cut removed structural support from the floors. The building also ran into zoning issues.
So you've already got immense strain on these pillars, all of that surface area that is... and then you want to cut out more of the what do you call it, the floor, the ceiling. You want to take away more of that surface area. This is making me very, very anxious. I know how it's going to end, but it just makes me so sad that it happened in the first place.
Structures of that size were not supposed to operate entirely as department stores. Lee found a workaround. He ordered the addition of a skating rink on the brand new 5th floor. But later, he changed his mind again. The skating rink never opened. Before long, it was converted into a cluster of restaurants, their kitchens heated by hot water pipes laid directly beneath the floor surface. This was another critical mistake, as the heavy kitchen equipment and the thick concrete required for the underfloor heating created a far greater weight burden than the skating rink ever would have. And just to make things even worse, the 5th floor had another design flaw. The columns on that floor did not line up with the columns beneath them.
Why?
In a properly engineered structure, columns stack vertically so that weight travels in a straight line from the
Yes.
uppermost floor down through every level to the foundation. In Sampung, the load transferred sideways through the concrete slab before reaching the next column down, putting even more stress on the columns and floor of the 5th level.
Why? I've just noticed how many times I've stopped this video to ask questions and have a bit of a mini rant. Why? What was it seems like a daft change to make that had no reason for it whatsoever. Or, you know, as it was intended to be an ice rink in the early planning stages, you couldn't even justify it by saying that. Just stupidity at every level.
Despite all these reckless changes, the building still made it through approval and opened to the public in 1990. And the answer to how it got away with all the violations lies in the timing. South Korea in the late 1980s was building fast. The economy was booming. Cities were expanding. New businesses were opening. And malls were suddenly everywhere. Then came the 1988 Olympics in Seoul. Hosting the games meant massive projects everywhere. Stadiums, hotels, roads, and shopping centers for tourists.
So it wasn't uncommon for big scale buildings like this to have to be constructed and thrown up in as short a time as possible to utilize the tourism from the Olympic Games, I'm assuming. And you know, all countries do it. Yes, it probably brought in a ridiculous amount of money for South Korea in 1988. Absolutely. I don't think anyone would begrudge any country that huge increase. But it's like an accumulation of how did they get away with this? You know, why did no one stop this from happening? It sounds like as an isolated incident, it makes you want to say, how did that happen? How were they given permission to do that in that space of time? Why was it not scrutinized, the plans? But when you see the context of this, it kind of, I'm not saying it should have happened, but it does make more sense as to how it kind of went a little bit more under the radar.
Deadlines were tight, and projects piled on top of each other. In favor of rapid development, building codes were often poorly enforced, inspections were rushed, and violations were brushed off just so projects could be finished on schedule. Cutting corners was being rewarded. Still, the mall stood with no impeding signs of danger for 5 straight years. So what was causing the cracks to appear now?
But you know who doesn't cut corners?
But you know who hey, that's my line. Oh, not another one. Bro!
Yes?
No, not you deja brews. I meant the original, never mind. Just don't take my lines, alright? It's not cool.
In the meeting, one executive recalled the relocation of the giant air conditioning units from 2 years ago. Not only did the units add additional weight, but residents in nearby apartments had complained about loud noise on the roof. So the management decided to move them away from the apartments. But they chose the cheaper option. Instead of hiring a crane again to lift the heavy equipment safely, workers dragged the units across the roof over the concrete surface. Those units weighed over 36 tons. The large tanks alongside them held roughly 87 tons of coolant.
How did they manage to drag them? That's heavy. Still, I mean, arguably, yes, it's a weight, and yes, structurally, this is a lot of weight on a badly designed structure, but the necessity of the aircon, I understand that. At least it's necessary. What's not necessary is the distribution of the pillars not aligning with the 4th floor below, and just even the fact the 5th floor was there.
That is equivalent to 30 adult elephants being dragged across a concrete roof. The massive weight gouged the surface and left cracks in several places. When the air conditioning units were powered on again, they vibrated constantly. The vibrations traveled through the damaged roof, down through the mismatched and undersized columns, and into the rest of the structure.
I know you guys are waiting for me to pause it again. Yeah, pause it again. Okay, that explains why, while the executives were in the meeting, that explains why they made the decision to turn off the aircon. I didn't think about that. The vibrations are going to make the cracks it's going to worsen them, isn't it? So I just think if someone has the bright spark idea to go, oh, yes, the aircon is causing, they're going to worsen the cracks that are already there on the roof. Okay, well, we can not make it any worse than that. We can turn them off. Still, at that point, I cannot accept. It's so difficult for me to believe that no one thought of what probably was thousands of people maybe in that mall and thought, let's not take any chances, get everyone out. I really struggle with that. I know I live in La La Land, nice boomy Disneyland, where everyone is kind and thinks of other people, but I find it really it's a hard pill to swallow.
One column in particular took the worst of it. Column 5E on the 5th floor. That was the column the facility manager had been looking at since 8:05 that morning. The damage had been building for years. At 4:00 p.m., the facility manager came rushing into the meeting with an update. His face was pale as he reported that the cracks around column 5E had widened to 4 inches since his first inspection that morning. The structural engineer who had led the completion of the mall's construction was in the room. After hearing the facility manager's report, he immediately advised the entire store be closed without any delay.
Pause it again. The fact that the structural engineer was present with all the execs in this room here, this is a big wig meeting, isn't it? This is all the higher ups. This isn't a last minute emergency meeting. Let's get the management in to discuss all of the faults with the structure and all of the problems that have just been reported to us over the last few days. I feel like they've been given so much warning over a bigger span of time. And so the fact that it's not been taped off and told, the public told that they can't enter the building because it's been going on for so long, it's absolutely shocking.
But Chairman Lee Jun refused to consider his warning. The crowd that day was unusually large and, therefore, more profitable. By 5:00 p.m., workers on the 5th floor could see the ceiling visibly sinking. They cleared out the remaining area on that level, leaving the 5th floor closed off entirely.
Get everyone
4
out that
floors
building.
below, the sales floor stayed open. Business as usual. Stores were busy. But after over 4 hours of no air conditioning, the heat in the building was starting to get to people. Staff like Park Sung-yun, a 19-year-old shop assistant, were starting to sweat through their uniforms. When she asked management about the AC, they told her it wasn't working, but would be fixed soon, and advised her to just continue with her work. Because the heat wasn't stopping shoppers like Lee Gun-suk. She was a 44-year-old housewife who had stepped out that afternoon with a neighbor to buy groceries for dinner. Sampung was near her apartment building, and when she entered the supermarket on the mall's ground floor, apart from the heat, nothing seemed off. But up above, more loud bangs came from the 5th floor ceiling as the roof cracked further.
See, the fact that there's a grocery store within this department store on some, I don't know what level this grocery store is. You can't have your aircon be switched off for a prolonged amount of time because surely you've got chilled goods or even frozen goods within the grocery store. So you can't do that. No? Okay.
To Lee Sun-min,
feel like I'm being
it
a bit Karen
sounded
at
like
this
a
point.
huge explosion.
You can't do
By
that.
5:40 p.m., the executives quietly gathered their things and left the building as
bet
the
they
upper
did.
floors continued to groan and pop under the weight above. More and more fine concrete
Liable.
dust drifted down from the cracks. Several thousand people were still inside the building, shopping, eating in the basement food court, and moving between floors on the escalators. First-year university student Choi Myung-suk
Turn the escalators off. There's no stairwells, is there? So they have to keep them operational. The elevators and the escalators, or one or the other, elevators, turn them off, make them non-operational. At 1 out of 2, at least it's going to. I was going to say it's going to minimize the damage here, but I think at this point it's unavoidable. I feel very strongly that everyone should have been evacuated out of this building early hours of the morning and earlier, like previously, weeks before this.
had spent the afternoon working in the children's shoe section. At around 5:45 p.m., he went down to the basement to grab something to eat. 18-year-old Lee Sun-min was still on her shift on the first basement floor when a coworker called her over to the other wing of the store. She started to head there and entered the passageway connecting the wings. Meanwhile, 19-year-old Yu Ji-hwan was still selling crystal in the basement when she heard a loud bang. Everything shook like an earthquake and then went silent. A moment later, at 5:52 p.m., a deep fracture tore through the structure from above. The roof gave way first, overloading the 5th floor, which consequently dropped into the 4th, and the force kept punching down, floor after floor, collapsing into the basement in under 20 seconds. Lights cut out as escalators twisted, and a wall of pulverized concrete and dust rushed through the building so fast that most people did not understand what was happening until they were already under the rubble. And just like that, almost 1,500 people were trapped in an instant. For Yu Ji-hwan, everything went pitch black. She was trapped in the rubble, shaped like a dome above her. She tried yelling for help, but all she got was silence in response. Concrete dust and smoke filled her lungs with every breath. The darkness was so complete that Lee Sun-min couldn't see her own hands in front of her.
I don't know about anyone else, but you know, when you see, oh gosh, oh, that is, I think just calling that a disaster doesn't do it justice. It doesn't sum it up. That's horrendous. I suppose when you think of a structure failing and collapsing in itself, I don't know about you guys, but I the dust, it's like one of the last things I think about, and it's more the crushing weight of the collapse. But yeah, absolutely. If you survive that, the dust is on a level. It's going to be like smoke, isn't it? It's just toxic and
Seconds after
so
the impact,
horrible.
a violent pressure wave moved through the broken structure, carrying debris and sound and a heat she could not explain. When it finally stopped, she could hear screaming from somewhere above her and from somewhere below. Every staircase in the north wing was filled with rubble, leaving her no way out. Rescue crews reached the site within minutes of the collapse, digging into the rubble with bare hands and whatever tools they had with them. They couldn't use their heavy equipment without the risk of harming potential survivors. The scale of what they were faced with was immediately clear. The south wing had collapsed completely, leaving the north wing standing alone like a 5-story jagged cliff. This remaining structure was visibly unstable. Seoul Mayor Choi Pyong-yeol, the city official responsible for coordinating this emergency response, faced a decision that had no good answer. Another partial collapse could kill rescuers working inside. He ordered parts of the rescue operation suspended. Expectedly, families and friends of people still trapped inside erupted in protest outside the site. Demonstrations formed in the thousands. They refused to accept the decision, and they made enough noise that the authorities could not ignore them.
It's a tough one because, like the narrator said here, there's such a high risk of a second collapse if you send your workers in to try and recover and help. Oh, that's impossible. There's no good decision, is that? That what do you do? My heart does bleed for the people that have to make these decisions because there's no good answer. How do you even decide? How do you live with yourself making either decision? It's
The collapse had also reached beyond the building itself. Cars in the underground garage had been crushed under the falling structure. The shock had cracked the walls of nearby apartment buildings and caused damage to hundreds of surrounding businesses. The scale of what had happened was becoming visible block by block. Faced with public pressure, Mayor Choi and city officials gave in. The rescue continued. Engineers were called in to stabilize the still standing ruins with guy cables, tying sections of the building to prevent further collapse. Slowly, carefully, rescuers went back in,
that is
determined to
the best choice, I
save
think.
as many people trapped under the rubble as possible. Unfortunately, the operation was disorganized. It took authorities close to an hour to establish a coordinated disaster response. Police failed to set up adequate barriers around the site, allowing civilians and reporters to move freely through the rubble, making it harder for emergency crews to reach those still trapped, and harder still to hear anything beneath the noise.
Well, what happened to, like, you know, there's a lot of red tape and everything around bureaucracy and health and safety and blah blah blah, blah. But surely there should be procedures and contingency plans in place, especially by the first responders, by the emergency services. You know, this is why contingency plans and stuff are put in place.
Back in the basement, Lee Sun-min was physically unharmed, but every exit was sealed. She had no choice but to just sit in complete darkness. Hours passed, breathing dust, listening to the sounds of the ruins settling around her, with no way to know whether anyone was coming or if the rumble around her might cave in at any moment. On another level, near an escalator by the central hall, Choi Myung-suk had made it through the initial collapse with his life intact. In the pitch darkness around him, he could hear two women nearby. Both were badly hurt. Neither could see him, and he couldn't see them. The first woman was a 25-year-old store employee. Though they couldn't see each other, they tried to encourage one another. But Choi could hear her voice weakening with every word. Eventually, she stopped speaking. The other voice was older, heavy with grief. She called desperately for her children, her voice trembling from both fear and the pain of serious injuries. Choi heard her frantic pleas for hours until she too stopped. Outside, through the night of June 29th and into the following day, rescuers began using cranes and heavy machinery with caution, lifting massive slabs of concrete and steel and setting them aside piece by piece. And even after over a day of non-stop work, the site looked almost unchanged from above. The same mountain of compressed floors, the same rising dust, the same crews moving carefully across surfaces that were still not fully stable. Then, at 8:57 p.m. on July 1st, a full 2 days after the collapse, the first trapped survivors were found. Rescuers reached a basement dressing room that had remained mostly intact. 24 cleaning staff were pulled out alive.
Oh my
That
gosh.
same evening, crews broke through to the section of the basement where Lee Sun-min had been trapped and brought her out alongside another survivor. However, the situation after those 3 days grew darker. 3 days is the maximum that most people can survive without water in hot weather. Only dead bodies were being recovered now. And so, the mission shifted. The heavy equipment would now be used more aggressively to clear out the remaining debris, since they believed there was no one left alive to be harmed underneath. But they were wrong. On day 4, the sounds of the machinery working above were the first things Yu Ji-hwan could remember hearing after the collapse. For the past 4 days, her mind had been fighting with itself. Sometimes she felt like she could survive this, but other days she believed she was going to die. When it rained, she tried to drink the water, but it tasted like rust. But then, the pressure from the heavy equipment above made the rubble around her legs collapse onto them. Pain coursed through her. As time went, the rubble above her started to sink closer and closer to her. She feared for her life, and she feared that her mother would never know what happened to her. 6 more days passed without a living person found. Officials began shifting the operation from rescue to recovery. Many on site were sure no one else could possibly still be alive. But in the dark beneath the rubble, Choi found rainwater pooling in the concrete around him. He drank it to keep himself alive in hopes that someone would find him before it was too late. Then, 9.5 days after the collapse, at around 9 a.m. on July 9th, a construction crew could not believe it as they pulled Choi alive from the wreckage. 1 day later, Yu Ji-hwan, still alive, could hear the workers' radios. They called out asking if someone was there. She screamed to them, but they didn't hear her. So she banged on the rubble. The chatter turned to excitement as they confirmed someone was alive. She saw the hole opening and felt the relief that she would be able to tell her mother what had happened to herself. They pulled.
Oh my god, that oh, that struck a nerve. The first thing she thinks of isn't, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. I'm so glad to be here. The first thing she thinks of is, oh, I get to tell my mum what happened to me, and because she's going to be worrying. Oh my gosh. Ooh. Oh, that struck a nerve. 10 days later.
Her out, and she was rushed to the hospital.
Oh, sorry, guys.
These rescues were miracles in their own right, and they didn't expect to find anyone else after that, especially not 17 days after the building fell. But that's when rescuers found 19-year-old Park Seung-hyun alive. She thought only 5 days had passed and asked for water. With only a scratch on her leg, the doctors believe she survived so long because she was semi-conscious and may have drunk rainwater to sustain herself. She just didn't remember. She was the last survivor found alive in the wreckage. By then, The search had stretched on for more than 2 weeks. After that, the operation recovered only the dead. When it finally ended, 502 people were dead, 502 lives. Workers, shoppers, parents, children crushed beneath a building that never should have been allowed to stand in the first place.
No.
It took the government 20 days to officially designate the Sampung site a special disaster zone, which finally unlocked emergency funding, resources, and legal authority for rescue operations.
What? It took 3 weeks to be able to secure funding for more rescue missions. That is disgusting. Why should it take so long? What?
But by that time, there was no one alive to rescue.
Oh.
9 days after that, the National Assembly formed a special investigation committee to determine what had caused the collapse and who was responsible. Korean lawmakers had already been hearing theories. Earlier that year, 2 gas explosions had struck other parts of Seoul, so some pointed to a similar cause here. Others suggested an act of terrorism, raising the possibility of North Korean involvement. But
Don't fob it off. Oh my gosh, no. So, might be a controversial opinion. I'm not sure. My opinion is very much that every one of these higher ups, these big wigs, these super VIP important people, every single one of them that had any knowledge of the failures, the warnings that had been put in place, if they were aware of the extent of the damage, every single person that knew or had some awareness, some knowledge is liable for this. Every single person. Maybe to different degrees. Maybe, there's some execs that had seen the warning and just chose to ignore it. I still think the blood of a lot of people is on their hands. And collectively, I think it goes beyond that. I think the poor structural engineers that did try to protest it, they were doing their job absolutely. It's a shame that no one listened to them, and what more can they do? But the people who did pass any of these plans, the people who made the plans, the owner, the people who cut the corners and made every bad decision at every turn, is liable for this and has blame and blood on their hands. Might be a controversial opinion. Maybe I'm being very, very strict with that, but I do believe very strongly that the blame rests on their door. Collectively, but yeah, a lot of people are to blame for this. It's just stupid, letting stupid happen. And then the next stupid higher up giving more permission for it to happen.
investigators quickly ruled both theories out.
Angry.
Fires
Angry
in the
Boomy.
rubble came from the gasoline of crushed cars in the underground garage, and the footage of the collapse showed the building fell straight down, not outwards, proving there was no explosion. The focus soon turned to an investigation into the mall's construction. The evidence was not difficult to find. Columns were undersized. Rebar was insufficient. Escalator holes had been cut through the structural slabs. The building had been carrying far more weight than it was ever designed to hold,
On an
on a
extra floor.
structure that had been altered, overloaded, and inadequately inspected from the moment it was built.
Yes,
The day
yes,
after the
yes.
collapse, Chairman Lee Jun and his son Lee Han-sung, who was the store's
Run away.
president, were arrested. Their
Oh.
photographs circulated on every Korean news channel for days.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought they were going to say they've left the country. They've flown away. No, they have been held accountable for this. They've been arrested. Thank goodness.
They became, in a very short period, two of the most infamous people in the country.
Two of the most
Yet,
hated
even
people in the
after being
country.
detained, Lee Jun showed almost no remorse. In interviews, he said almost nothing about the dead. He only expressed concern for how much money he lost. Lee Jun
I can't listen to it. I'm struggling. I'm really struggling to process it, guys. This man is disgusting.
was charged with negligent homicide for the consequences of his reckless actions.
Yep.
Prosecutors also traced the disaster back to a wider web of corruption, arguing that bribed officials had helped illegal design changes pass the inspection.
Must have,
As a
yeah.
result, Lee Jun was also charged with bribery. Prosecutors sought a 20-year sentence.
Throw another
Eventually,
charge on.
he would
Yeah.
be convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in prison. On appeal, that sentence was reduced to 7 years and 6 months. Meanwhile, his son, Han Sang-lee, was jailed for 7 years for corruption and accidental homicide.
That's the consequence of directly resulting in the death of 500 plus people whose names individually they will not be bothered to know. They don't know the faces of the people that their negligence has killed. 7 years in prison each. Such an injustice. I am so offended by this. That's so horrible.
Part of the Seocho local government approval
Get
system was
500
found
life
to be corrupt.
sentences.
City officials were also punished for
502.
illegally approving the building's designs. Lee Chung-woo, a district administrator connected to the area, received 3 years in prison for bribery. Former Seocho ward chief Hwang Shul-min was also convicted of taking bribes and received a 10-year sentence. But for most
They have the same crime. Why is one doing 10 years and one is doing 3? Why is, like, doing 3 years for bribery? Yeah, okay, I can understand. That's, I mean, personally, I think you should get longer, but I understand that is a okay sentence. But how is that comparable to the 7 years that the co-owners, the two owners, the father and son got for significantly like a higher, a more rap sheet? My brain is clouded with anger right now.
South Koreans, the punishments still felt painfully small compared with the scale of the disaster. A month after the collapse, with bodies still being identified and families still searching for the missing, the Lee family offered their entire wealth as compensation to the victims.
Oh, did
For many
they?
of the bereaved, even this did not come close to feeling like justice. Lee Han-sang, Lee
So
Jun's
surprised
son
they
and
did
the
it, to be
president of the
honest.
Sampung Mall, left the business world entirely after his release and became a Christian evangelist in Mongolia. Lee Jun
Right, okay. I imagine you would never get another business opportunity again because you should be shamed for this.
did not live long after leaving prison. He died on October 4th, 2003, after suffering from diabetes, high blood pressure, and kidney disease. He had only served roughly half his already reduced sentence. Most importantly, the collapse forced changes that extended far beyond the Sampung Group. In the months that followed, South Korea introduced new disaster management laws and began building a more centralized emergency response system.
That's
And when
good.
the investigators looked more broadly at the country's building stock, they found that 14% of high-rise structures were deemed unsafe, 84% required repair work, and only 2% fully met safety standards. Sampung was merely a visible consequence of a rotted system infected with bribery and negligence. The site itself was eventually cleared and redeveloped. A luxury apartment complex now stands where the department store once did. In the end, Sampung was not a freak accident. It was the final consequence of greed at every stage of the building's life, during its design, its construction, its illegal modifications, and finally, in the decision to not evacuate when the danger was impossible to ignore.
That's the big one for me.
502 people died because one man put profit ahead of human life for years.
Yep.
Another 937
Even in
barely
his
made it
trial,
out
he did.
alive and were forced to live on with a horrifying trauma. 30 years is a long time, long enough for a collapsed department store to be replaced by a luxury apartment complex. But the people of South Korea still haven't moved on from the
Yeah,
tragedy that
don't
unfolded
forget.
on June 29, 1995. Choi Myung-suk, Yoo Ji-hwan, and Park Sung-hyun later came to be known as the last survivors. All three carried what happened to them for the rest of their lives. Yoo Ji-hwan spent nearly a decade afraid to use the subway, haunted by the memory of being trapped underground. Choi Myung-suk struggled with nightmares and sleepless nights, replaying screams and falling concrete. Yet over time, he eventually returned to working life and directed his career toward construction safety. Along with Park Sung-hyun, these final survivors formed a bond that would last a lifetime, connected by the memory of what almost ended them and how, by a miracle, they still got out alive. But not everyone found closure. Families like that of Lee Gyun-suk never learned her fate. Her family filed missing person reports in the weeks that followed and contacted every available agency, but no answers ever came. For them, and so many other families, June 29, 1995, remains an open wound. Every year, on the anniversary, families gather at a memorial tower and honor the memories of the lost loved ones. Recently, the dead were remembered on the 30th anniversary in 2025 at the Sampung Disaster Memorial Tower in Mahun Citizens Forest, where bereaved families gathered and laid out 502 pink pinwheels across the ground, one for each person who did not come home.
If
you found this video interesting and would like to help get it noticed by the algorithm, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Another way you can help is by checking out another one of our videos, like this one. Speaking of support, thank you to our top tier members, Nexus and Xander, as well as our other generous members at stack.com/brew for helping keep this channel going.
Very, so very, very unbelievably sad. That just, it doesn't actually even cover the sadness that I feel hearing this for the first time. I had no idea about this disaster. I've never heard of it before. It's so unbelievably tragic because it's not an accident. It's not a freak accident. This was allowed to happen by a number of people whose sole job, well, not their sole job, but it's their responsibility to ensure that these structures were safe. And every single one of these people and the people that were injured, or just the entire public, have just been let down by all of these officials on so many different levels. The executives, the corrupt structural engineers, not the good ones, the ones that did let it all go through in the end, the officials, the government officials that took backhanders, bribed, they allowed it to happen. Not only that, there was so many opportunities, there were so many chances to evacuate people and save the lives of these 502 people. And they chose to not do that out of sheer greed. And it's absolutely shocking. There's so many ways in which this story is so tragic. It's not just what, there's so many different layers of sadness to it. My heart absolutely goes out to the family and the bereaved, if anyone that was in this. It's horrible. And not having the closure of knowing if this actually happened to one of your loved ones, because it's still unknown if they were there or not. That's an absolute disaster. Thank you for requesting this video, Soy, my lovely. It's just to say that it's sad it's not enough. There's no words for this. It's tragic. It's a catastrophe. It's even more shocking that I've not heard of it before, especially with the 30th anniversary only taking place last year. But thank you, my lovely Soy, for sharing this video with me. I've drawn my attention to it. Fortunately, things have been changed. Laws, building regs have been put in place, hopefully, to make sure that something like this never, ever happens again, or even the chance of it ever happening again. Honestly. Well, guys, I hope you found that as interesting as I did. I hope it didn't bring any of you to tears like it. Oh my gosh, it had me earlier. Take care of yourselves, my lovelies, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.